July, you wouldn't pull it out in March, but it's one of those things where it's Christmas, so it's a requirement to watch A Christmas Carol. And if you watch it the first time, or the second time, or the third time, or perhaps you watch the original black and white, and then perhaps then you watch when it had the colorized version, and then maybe you're even one of those people who watch the Muppets or any other cartoon version. You may watch it over and over again and realize, boy, this seems to be a lot about Christmas, but the truth of the matter is, the Christmas story is not about Christmas. The Christmas Carol show is actually about redemption. It's about transformation. It's about conversion. The snow, the decorations, the food, and all the holiday parties, they're just supporting backdrops to the main story. Yes, Christmas time is the setting, and eventually it is Christmas that is the catalyst that makes the change. But the true leading character in this story is Ebenezer Scrooge. Scrooge is an iconic figure who represents that stinginess and that greed, and he's always in a terrible, terrible mood. Although Scrooge does have one great love in the world, and that love is money. Scrooge lives according to that principle some of us have read in Galatians 6, verse 7. It says, "You reap what you sow." But Scrooge takes it to the extreme. We can assume that when Charles Dickens wrote this play that he didn't give Scrooge the first name Ebenezer for no good reason. The word Ebenezer, actually, it comes from a biblical story. It's a word that some of you will sing when we sing Come Thou Fount. You'll sing, I raised my Ebenezer, and you'll all wonder, what in the world is my Ebenezer? It actually comes from the Old Testament. It comes from the story between a war between the Philistines and the Israelites. It's found in the first book of Samuel. And in this part of the story, the Philistines had been attacking the nation over and over, and they finally capture what's called the Ark of the Covenant, and they take it with them. Now, if you remember, we've talked about the Ark of the Covenant before, a couple of weeks earlier. I referred to it as the mobile house of God. And so the Israelites thought God had left them. He had been captured, and the Philistines took him away, and this sent their nation into absolute chaos. They went into a frenzy, not knowing what to do, and quickly they became distracted, and they forgot about all the rituals, and they forgot about who to thank and who their Creator was, and they lost sight of God. Eventually, the Israelites turned back to God. And when they do, they pay sacrifice to Him. And when the Philistines return again to have another war, this time the Israelites win. And they celebrate. They not only win the war, they get the Ark of the Covenant back. And so they celebrate. And Samuel, he plants a stone in the middle of town. And this stone, he calls it an Ebenezer. And the stone represents the Lord's help for us. Ebenezer actually means a reminder. It's a reminder of God's faithfulness and His grace that's poured out to us. It's a symbol of transformation and redemption. So when you sing out, I raise my Ebenezer, you're remembering all that God has done for you and delivered you and redeemed you. But first, we go back to the story with Ebenezer the Scrooge. And he lives out this Scrooge life with all of its meaning and fare and all that he can muster. He is the epitome of Scrooge. And no one likes to be called Scrooge, right? We've used that term over and over throughout the centuries to call that person who doesn't seem to quite have the holiday spirit. We know back in the late 1800s, there was a woman by the name of Hetty Green. She was the daughter of a whaling tycoon, and when her parents passed, she inherited $7.5 million. And that was all the way back in 1864. That was a lot of money. But you see, Hetty Green was a very intelligent woman. She invested that money in business. And she worked very hard on Wall Street. She broke all sorts of rules and grounds and all those things about women working in the world. And she was very, very successful with her money. The problem is that Hetty was remembered for one thing. and that was her excessively cheap lifestyle. She would not use hot water. She wouldn't use heat. Every day that she went to work, she wore the same black dress. She became known as the Witch of Wall Street because of the way she looked when she went to work. When she died in 1916, she was worth $200 million. She was the richest woman in the world, successful and smart. Problem is, the only thing that Hetty Green was remembered for was being a Scrooge. You know, Jesus has taught many times throughout Scriptures the difficulty that people have when it comes to dealing with their wealth. In Luke 16, he said, "No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." A couple weeks ago, I brought up an analogy that had to do with a window pane. Do you remember that? You look through the clear window pane, and what do you see on the other side? You see people. You see other people on the other side of that window. But when we come to a mirror, which is nothing more than a single pane of glass with silver painted on it, when we look into that pane of glass, all we see is ourselves. Wealth and money and prosperity gets in the way for us. 1 Timothy says this, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of other evils." And so this is where our Christmas carol begins. The words say, "Jacob Marley is dead. Dead as a doornail." It's a pretty odd way to start a story, isn't it? Jacob Marley is dead. Now this may not say much, but it actually is the groundwork and the foundation for the rest of the story. We have to understand that Jacob Marley, who was Scrooge's lifetime business partner, was dead. In fact, he had died 7 years earlier on Christmas Eve. Both men, Jacob Marley and Scrooge, had spent their whole life hoarding wealth, exploiting others, and not reaching out, and not accepting, and not connecting with people around them. But Marley died first. So Marley got the consequence of his whole life wrapped up into one. And on that fateful night when Jacob Marley comes and visits Scrooge, he comes like a very dark ghost. He's strapped in chains that are weighing him down. He has a money box strapped to his leg that he's dragging along. And he's wandering aimlessly throughout the earth. No point, no purpose, and no love. Marley realizes that he is dead. And he realizes that he was dead long before they laid his body in the casket. He was dead even when he was alive. There had been no life in him for his entire existence. Realizing this, Jacob goes to his friend Scrooge, and he tries to tell him about this tragedy and to urge him about what he should do and to change his ways. But Dickens is very clear about Scrooge. He says, "Now, Scrooge was a very cold person." In fact, this is how he describes him. He says, "The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and he spoke with a shrewd and grating voice." Sounds like a really nice guy, doesn't he? So, of course, Scrooge doesn't believe Marley. He dismisses the whole event as a bit of bad beef that he had for dinner. That night, it takes 3 more ghosts to try and speak to Scrooge, to teach Scrooge that he is dead, even though he is breathing. You know, I don't think it's a coincidence that Charles Dickens' story reflects many of the teachings that Jesus gave to us in Scriptures about wealth. There are several stories about humans and wealth and distraction and loss of hope. In the Gospel of Mark, chapter 10, there's a story of a rich young man. The story goes like this. As Jesus was setting out on a journey, a man ran up to him and knelt at his feet. And he said to him, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said to him, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone. You know the commandments. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. You shall not defraud. Honor your mother and father." He said to him, "Teacher, I have kept all of these things since my youth." Can you just hear the rich young man? He's proud of himself. He's lived a life worthy of recognition and praise. Jesus, looking back at him, loved him and said to him, "You lack one thing. Go and sell what you own and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me." When the young man heard this, he was shocked, and he went away grieving, for he had many possessions. Then Jesus looked around and he said to his disciples, "How hard will it be for those who have wealth to enter the kingdom of God?" You see, both men clearly love money. Scrooge and the rich young man in the Gospel of Mark. But they get to this point from two different paths. See, Scrooge was greedy. He was egotistical. He was self-centered and mean. He was a hoarder beyond hoarder. But this young man in Mark's Gospel, he was a citizen in the community we would lift up. He gave to the charities. He helped when there was need. He brought food in for the Thanksgiving baskets. He came on volunteer night. He served many hours in doing things. And yet both of them come to this point in their life when they realize that there is something missing. Something is missing. And so the young man runs to Jesus, the scriptures tells us, runs to Jesus and kneels at his feet. Scrooge, on the other hand, he wouldn't cross the street for anybody. So he stays home in his bed. Jacob Marley and the spirits come to him. And both these men received the same message they needed to hear. Possess your money properly, or it will possess you. And Marley says to Scrooge, "You better figure this out real quick before it's all too late." In many ways, Scrooge and this young man, they find them at the same point in time. It's the point that we call a raccoon trap. Has anyone ever heard of a raccoon trap? In the book that's called Where the Red Fern Grows, the little boy describes the best way to trap a coon. You take a jar, and you put a shining object inside of it that would glitter in the light. When the raccoon comes, they'll reach inside the jar and they'll grab the object. And they won't let go. All the raccoon has to do is let go, and their hand will come right out. But they can't. They've got a hold of that shiny object, and they cannot let go. Scrooge and the rich young man are in the same predicament. They've got a hold of that shiny object that's so near and dear to them, and they can't let go. In fact, they are dead set against it. This is why both men are sent this very valuable message they need to hear. Now, Marley, with his love, or perhaps not love, perhaps he has a little bit of compassion for his old-time friend Scrooge, he comes to him and he tells them, "You need to let go. You need to make change. You need to do so before time runs out." Jesus has a very similar, clear message for the rich young ruler. Now, in Mark's Gospel, when I read that to you, did you catch the very beginning? It says Jesus was on a journey. Before the rich young man comes running up and kneels at his feet, Jesus is on a journey. You know where he's going? Jesus is on a journey to Jerusalem. He's on his way to a trial. He's on a way to be mocked and whipped and abused. He's on his way to suffer pain and suffering beyond what we can think of. He's on his way to crucifixion and death. But before he gets there, Jesus stops with this rich young man. He looks down upon him, and he loves him. Soon after Jesus gives the teachings on riches and the impossibility of man saving himself, he teaches one last lesson. It's found in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 20. The last shall become first. So those who are last will be first, and those who are first will be last. The human one will be handed over to the chief priests and the legal experts. They will condemn him to death. They will hand him over to the Gentiles to be ridiculed, tortured, and crucified. But he will be raised on the third day. Death and resurrection. The last shall become first. And Jesus is the one who's going to do that. He's the one who's going to be born. He's the one who's going to die. And he's the one who's going to rise again. Jesus is the one who was, who is, and who ever will be. Jesus is the past, the present, and the future. Jesus' journey is our journey. You know, that morning at the end of the Christmas carol, Scrooge awakes, and he awakes quite surprised that he's not dead. And he's filled with joy. It's Christmas. And he realizes there is still time. It's time for redemption and change. He realizes that he's not alone at all. I don't know about the rich young man in Mark's Gospel. Mark doesn't tell us if he woke up. Mark doesn't tell us if he went home and changed. Mark doesn't tell us if he followed Jesus or not. Mark doesn't tell us what we want to know. But what he does tell us is what we need to know. And we are no better than Scrooge or that rich young man. That each and every one of us has things that we place in front of God and our faith. And that each and every one of us has a very limited time. We all have our gods. We all have our allegiances. Christ has come to take those from us and to redeem us. Some would say that God is a jealous God, and I would agree with that. He's so jealous that no other gods will do for us. He's so jealous that no other God will comfort or love us when we are in strife or in pain. No other God will show mercy when we're in grief, and no other God will crawl into a grave and be resurrected just for you. No other God has died for you. Jesus has done that. And in doing that, Jesus has redeemed each and every one of us. God has blessed us through his Son, Jesus Christ. He has blessed us, everyone. God has blessed us, everyone. This story of Christmas Carol is an absolutely factual story. It is true. Scrooge can be redeemed.